Alrighty, I believe we are live. Hello, hello, llamas. Good to see you all here. Oh my gosh, the chat just exploded here with all these comments. Hi, everybody. I am your host, Marion, here, and we have the wonderful Jill Gustavis doing our very first live feedback session here with us today. Hello, everybody from the Philippines, from the Netherlands, from Australia. Oh my gosh, you guys are all over. This is incredible. Netherlands, wow. Two people from the Netherlands. Awesome. Great. Okay, so just a couple of things that I want to do in my introduction before we have Jill get started. As you know, this is our very first live feedback session, only exclusively on our YouTube channel with our very first resident artist, Jill Gustavis. To launch this very special occasion, we are offering a chance to win a $100 Etchr Lab gift card to use in our store. And you have to be present for the entire session though, and be present till the end so that we will do a giveaway drawing at the very end after the presentation is done. So hang around, ask your questions to Jill in the comments below in the chat. And I'll do my best to keep up with you guys in the chat, but Jill will be focused on giving her feedback and critique to the artwork that was submitted. During the time that we ask for them so that we can create this presentation for you. So a couple of other things here to know is that our resident artist is a group of teachers who have a very holistic approach to their teaching ability and artistic processes. And so our resident artists are very skilled in creating in teaching a variety of different topics and techniques. And that's why they are part of our resident artist program. So Jill here is a very multifaceted artist. The main quality that we have that we're looking for in our resident artist program, as you know, Jill has a very wide variety of different subjects and techniques that she uses. The work that she will be presenting here are from classes that she has taught previously through Etchr, so that there is some relation there. So there will be more in the future. Today was a very special occasion that we're doing a giveaway. We can't guarantee that the future live feedback sessions would also have a giveaway, but we figured this would be a really great way to help you guys improve your artwork and get personalized feedback, even more so from a teacher that is really great at what she does. Okay, so I think that's about it. So just a reminder again for everybody who just joined in just now, there is a giveaway drawing for those who submitted their artwork and is attending live at the end of our presentation. We will do a drawing at the very end, so do stick around for that. In the meantime, any questions that you have for Jill, whether they're related to her work or a question about a feedback that she's giving, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll approach them to Jill at an appropriate time. Okay. All right, Jill, let's go ahead and have you take it on from here. Go ahead and have us learn what you're about to do today.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I love trying new things, so this will be interesting. So bear with us too. The way I kind of went about this, because we haven't done one of these before, so I took Etchr forwarded me, everything that you guys have submitted, and I pulled from those works that kind of show similar themes. So whether that's, it's usually a lot of stuff that I'm always talking about in my workshop. So there's going to be a lot of talk about value. There's going to be a lot of talk about like actual physical technique with a brush, and also just some overarching art principles as well. Although I think all of the artworks that were submitted were from the negative painting series of classes, you're going to see that theme kind of run through, but I will be talking about some other things too that may not be particularly negative painting, just because in the world everything is connected, and usually you're not doing a painting that is only negative painting. My whole thing is using a mix of negative painting with other things. That way the focus is on how well the piece works as a whole versus like, look at this technique I learned to do, which is always exciting, but shouldn't be the sole focus of your painting. So like I said, I've made a presentation here and we'll kind of go through it. And yeah, feel free to put any questions in the chat. So some of the pictures I got, I did get some background information on maybe some struggles you were dealing with or a question you particularly asked, but some of the work I don't have any background. So I may, talk about some assumptions I have about maybe paper or, but feel free to throw in the chat. I don't know if there's a delay, but to give me any more to work with. Or if you have a question about your own work that may be similar, I will try and make some of my suggestions more general, so that you're like, well, that's not my artwork, but I've definitely had the same experience. So I will try and make it applicable. So even if you didn't submit work, you can, gain some nuggets of advice. So if you want to hit next, we'll just jump in.
All right.
Okay, so value is always one of the biggest things that I talk about in my classes, and definitely something that I myself had to learn to pay more attention to as I grew from being a beginner into, intermediate. And so many of the times you may have a good range of value, say, in your work, but maybe it's in only one spot. But so like, actually, I know that Suman had asked a question with her piece here on the left, this rose, which you did a lovely job. I love the balance of the color between the orange and the green. It definitely keeps it lively and interesting. Her question was, her paint was drying very fast on the paper, and it comes down to a couple different things. I know in my negative painting masterclass, I talk about all the different factors that can go into your success of a painting. And some of it could be your environment. So it could be if you live in a dry environment, your painting is going to dry faster. Meaning some of these blending techniques that I use to create soft edges, they may not work necessarily as smoothly as if you were in a more temperate or humid environment where your paper and paint is going to dry slower. Other things that may factor in are paper. So if you're using cotton paper or cellulose paper, cotton paper does have a more forgiving kind of drying behavior. It's more absorptive. I find it has a like softer, like really lovely way of incorporating the pigments. And then there's always, it could be application as well. So whether you're not using enough water when you put down your paint, that could be another reason that the application you just put down is drying a little bit too fast. So that might help you out with getting some of those blending techniques and really fleshing out some of those areas that may end up looking not flat, but a little bit less, there's less gradients in them. And then we also have this beautiful tulip piece by Maestern. And so a lot with the value is in creating, so we have the sense of depth within the leaves where you have the leaves are a lighter value than the background. A thing to remember is that within each object, you should also try and determine whether you're using a photograph or you're painting from life. Usually there's a light side and a dark side. So within each object too, it's always good to think about, the direction of your light and creating a dark side and a light side and just using that to guide where you're going to be putting your shadows. It is sometimes hard to judge in a photograph what's going on. So I know sometimes that's really difficult when using a reference photo. But using that value, I do notice a lot of beginners just don't put down enough initially. And sometimes just putting in an extra layer or two to create some more depth, you'll really see a big difference in a piece that, maybe is just a little bit too light. And that's the reason why maybe you think it needs improvement. So if you want to hit next for me. Okay, so there's a couple slides here that are about value, but then like factoring in some other things. So both of these pieces have a really great value range. And what I wanted to kind of point out was that when you're looking at your piece as a whole, sometimes if you step back, you can kind of see where maybe there's a piece of it that needs to be in balance with the other half. So actually in both of these pieces, the bottom right tends to be where most of your deeper values are. And if, say you were to put a little bit, whether it's wet and wet or you create like a really stark backdrop behind clouds of just pure night sky. If there was a little bit more depth behind, say, like the moon in both of these photos is in the upper left, that would balance out some of that deeper value in the right. Maybe not enough to say cloud the whole piece, not not like a weather cloud, but as you'll see in a few slides, a piece of my own, sometimes if you had too much value everywhere, it will become too heavy. But sometimes just having a little bit somewhere else is enough to balance out the other side of the piece. So here we have those two pieces here from Kim Smith and Kitty Mayer, both lovely takes on, I know Kim used the reference photo from the mini workshop, and it looks like Kitty kind of came up with an imaginary landscape or another photograph or the reference photo. Both are just lovely. I love the different colors that are in there. You can go ahead and hit next. Let me know if I'm talking too fast. I'm a little nervous myself. Okay.
You're doing just great.
Okay. Okay. So the next couple, I'm really excited that some of you submitted pieces that were inspired by some of the things that I've been teaching, just like the last slide. When you use it with your own reference or your own inspiration, sometimes you will kind of, because you're doing a little bit more challenging work and applying it to something that I haven't specifically talked about, you are going to notice that you may, I'm trying to think of the right phrase. You might digest and actually absorb and understand some of the concepts a little bit more because you are meeting a challenge. And some of that is actually like the biggest reason that you should kind of push your boundaries sometimes. But here we have two pieces by Bonita Hendricks, and she had also submitted a little bit of a question with that she couldn't forget dark enough in the monochromatic piece there. It could be, once again, like I covered in that first slide there, it could be your environment, it could be your paper, or certain paints sometimes have, I can see, like, looks like, I can't tell if it's a monochromatic piece or if there is some neutral mixing in there, but certain paints do have a limited value range. So there are some pigments that you would think would be really dark, but if you actually layer them out, their deepest value that they can reach is actually not as deep as another paint, which is kind of what you have in your mind about how dark you want to go. So that's always interesting to keep an eye on, is the paint you're using, if it can even go as dark as you'd like to go. So you have to remember the value range. That range differs with each pigment you could use. But it's a lovely composition here you have for the skyscape. And then she also submitted this, it looks like apple blossoms or another tree flower, cherry blossoms perhaps. And she said that having done the negative painting workshop, she was inspired to take on this photo, and that once she added the green leaves, that the blossoms kind of popped out. And that's really the big, what's it called, reason to look at using value. So it's the darker value of that green that made the blossoms look more right or more fitting in your composition, because they might look a little too light before you add that contrasting value. But once you add that and you kind of see it as a whole, that's when you can kind of start to see if something you've already put down is working or not working or needs work. And the only thing I would add to the piece on the right is that when you're working with white subjects, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the next slide, you do have to remember there are other colors in that white, in that shadow, than just, say, like the accent color, which is the pink here. So like the tulip demonstration I believe I have on YouTube with Etchr, it is a purely white petal, but we're using purples, we're using, blues in the shadows, because there are other colors that are coming through in the light or the absence of light. And so if you do want to move to the next slide, we have another example of someone who did something from the workshops and has submitted also a piece they did on their own. And this is from Janet. And her question that she kind of submitted with her work was that she felt like she kind of had a handle on the negative painting in the monochromatic, but then moving into color, she wanted to know how to make it maybe less muddy. And working in color, it is good to have like your basis of how value works before you move into color. I know that's helped me. That's why I kind of do a lot of monochromatic work to just kind of fine tune that inner eye. Because then when I'm working in color, I can look at something and be like, something seems off. And if I can't tell what it is, usually what I like to do is take a black and white photo of my work. And actually, if you want to go to the next slide for just a moment. If you take a black and white photo, so here I've just added a slide where her work is in grayscale, and you can kind of see where it needs just value. And then when you are working in color, you're going to want to make the right choice. So if you're just learning, maybe just adding like neutral tint or Payne's gray, something that's fairly easy and no mess. But if you are working with color, like really getting in there, you can use whatever you may think. So actually, if you want to go back a slide, so like yellow, a good color to use to darken or contrast yellow is purple because that's its complement. So depending on what colors you're working with, you can if I plug my newest mini workshop, you can use some thumbnails to determine what may be the best color to make what you're trying to highlight pop. And that way, if you test it out beforehand to kind of have an idea, you may encounter less mud in your paint application. And then when it comes to doing the negative painting portion, having some sort of idea of where you are going to be leaving some things in the background that are maybe of the lighter value. So I can see you have some far off lemons there that maybe you wanted to include at a smaller scale. So you can either plan to drop them in or do the negative painting kind of like wet around them so that they still look kind of out of focus, but still you leave like a little bit of lighter value to denote that there is an object that is this bright yellow fruit in the background. Some of that can kind of help. But I think you did a great job overall on this piece, especially those two front lemons. As I was talking about, with each object kind of has a light side and a dark side. You did a great job of using kind of like this gradient of light to show that the light is coming from the right. And I can clearly see what is in front of what. And my eye is led into the composition. And it knows, like you allow it to, you take the work out, basically. You make it easy for the viewer to see that, where the light's coming from, where they should be going with their eye. So I think you did a great job on this overall, even if you did have some questions on how to improve for next time. I think that's a great way.
Jill, there was a question if you'd like to answer this real quick before we go into the next step. Sorry, you guys, my face has to pop up so that you can hear me. So Kim is asking, would you use the complementary color in the shadows behind the object or the shadows on the object?
I think that would depend on what the subject looks like. Everything is, dependent on your reference or, what you have in your head, not that you have to use a reference photo. So a lot of times to darken the color of the object, the local color, so the yellow of the lemon, you may add purple to make that darker. However, it's all dependent on what is around you. So if it's right next to another lemon or it's next to the green leaf, you may want to add more blue because that green color from the leaf is going to be kind of reflected in the lemon as well. So I think like the color here that she has on the front lemon, It has like a little bit of green in it, which is kind of nice. It kind of ties everything together because that's how, you know, the light reflects in real life. It's picking up colors. That's why like white things are never just white. They are a mix of whatever is reflecting on them. So it definitely depends on your subject. So the complement's gonna make it darker and less saturated. So you can choose whether you want to do that or use one of the other two. I always mispronounce analogous analogous colors.
Analogous colors, yeah.
If you want to just kind of like play it up and darken it a bit, but have like a tone, a color tone, whether it's blue or in this case, red would be the other analogous there. So it's kind of up to you and your artistic vision and what you like. So you can go on, we can probably bump past the next one because that's got the grayscale version. Okay, so this is a personal example of something I'm working on right now. Actually, it's on the easel behind me. So this is 3 stages of a painting I'm working on, and it's honestly, I wouldn't call it a, well, actually go to the next slide and we'll talk about why, not to say it's not a success, but you can see here the value got a little bit too dark in the last one there because I got a little carried away with the shadows and I forgot to leave some light speckles. So you kind of go into the photo, you're not really sure what's going on and you're not even sure where to go. And some of that is because of the colors that I used, and it's very deceptive. Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. So red is actually an extremely dark value. And you don't realize it until you put it in black and white. But you can see here that it's no surprise that you can be kind of confused as to what's not working, because in color, you're so distracted by the color that you forget to check in with maybe those values. And if you want to pop back to the so your eye knows what it's looking at, and it gets excited by like say like the middle one there. There's a good mix of jumping from light value to dark value to light value to dark value. And so that keeps it moving and it keeps the composition interesting. It's just something that there's so many different compounding elements that go into doing a painting that it is very hard to keep track of them all. But every once in a while, like if you do something to work on just one of them, you will see a bit more growth, because once you kind of get one down, then you go work on another one. Like that's why I like to teach the negative painting workshop is in monochrome, because we're just working with value. We're trying to make the composition work without adding color, because color can be extremely distracting. Like I still, as this piece demonstrates, sometimes get too wrapped up with what color I'm working with and forget to check in with that value. Like I still enjoy this piece. I'm still working on it, but it is a good, you know, reality check that sometimes there's a lot going on and it's very easy to get swept up. So if you want to move on to the next one. So blending is kind of the next category. And in my mind, this is a lot of it. Improving in blending is a lot to do with just getting the hours down with your brush and practicing and seeing what happens with certain water levels and or certain papers, certain pigments. Now, both of these pieces here have first great color variation. I actually really love the both of them have like a little bit of warms, a little bit of cools, and that keeps your eye moving. It kind of gives you some direction through the piece. Both, though, I do feel like there could be a bit softer blending, and a lot of times that has to do with whether or not your paper was drying too fast, which we covered earlier. It can also be that you're not using enough water. Or sometimes the downsides of working with the mini workshops is you're trying to keep up with the instruction, and sometimes you do have to kind of slow down and work with one area at a time. So sometimes in my studio, I'm working a bit slower than when I'm working in the mini workshops, just because to make everything make sense and you're not seeing the same thing repeated for 2 hours, you know, we tend to speed things up and make it a little bit more efficient instruction. But yeah, so keeping an eye on your paper dampness is usually the biggest thing that I would recommend. So whether you're kind of looking at it from the side, um, or you have a paper towel if it's too wet, or a damp brush to kind of tease out a soft edge. But that's kind of one of the things I would probably recommend. And then also, if you are working on cellulose paper, there is eventually a point where it's going to hinder your ability to blend smoothly. Cotton paper will allow you to keep moving that pigment around as long as you're not scrubbing it, and destroying, literally like picking apart the paper surface. But cellulose paper, I have found that the way the sizing on the fibers work, you will reach a maximum amount of like smoothness, because once the sizing kind of dissolves, it tends to just get a little fuzzy looking, and the pigment will start to absorb at different rates on different parts of the paper. So which is why usually we recommend doing cotton paper. So if you were using cellulose, I would definitely recommend trying it on cotton. And you'll probably like instantly see improvement. But if not, sometimes the cotton paper still with those other factors, you could, look at a couple things to help improve the blending. Let's see if you want to move on to the next one. Awesome. So another thing to talk about is your personal blending aesthetic. So that being said, everything I said in the last slide, it's really down to you if you want to blend it out softly or not. Like I said at the beginning, or if I remember to say at the beginning, this is all from my point of view. So all of these critiques. So if you want to be more impressionistic, then maybe not take every word I have verbatim. I tend to want to work very soft blending. If you like that, a lot of plein air sketchers or a lot of urban sketchers have more of a graphic style to creating shadows or creating that, which is lovely. It's just not how I work. So always keep that in the back of your mind. But here we have two examples from Bonnie Parsons, and I love both of these. First, I do enjoy the colors. So we have a whole range of colors in the left one here. There's like a teal and some bright green and the orange and the purple, and like picking out all of these colors on the white flower. It's really, really lovely. And this was done, I believe, in just watercolor. And then because I did scroll through the Facebook as well to try and see some background information on all these photos. I do believe she said she did use some watercolor pencils as well as the watercolor and some white paint. And it definitely has a very soft, almost impressionistic look. But you could see some of the shadows, especially that left one on the left, where that petal kind of folds in underneath the center cluster of petals. It's a little bit softer of a gradient. And you can see that it definitely, your eye picks it up as a cue that there is almost like a bell shape there. That's what your eye is looking for to tell it what shape that object is. So in any of the areas, if you have a gradient, so it's a light side and a dark side, is basically just directing your eye to tell your brain that, okay, this area is closer to the light and this area is not. Thus, this area is either higher up or wrapped around, or depending on where your light's coming from, all of this serves as cues for your brain to interpret the painting as an object. So anytime you're working with a 3D object, always be thinking about, where is my light and how can I work with this surface that I'm working with right here, like this paint, this petal. What can I do to better explain its relation to my light source and this object? So you can see both examples really great here. And I love the two different color palettes. I tend to paint, I've actually painted this rose a few times myself, and I've used different color palettes, and it always ends up coming out a little bit different each time. If you want to move on to make sure there's no questions either. Okay. So along the lines of that same principle, I tried to organize these slides so they kind of lead into each other. By having that light and dark, you create that direction, you create a flow within your piece. And if you ever see like people talk about composition, like, oh, your eye went to this spot and then it goes here and then it goes here. But sometimes just even if you don't have in your mind, like, I want their eye to go here first, like, but if you connect the pieces of your painting, it tends to produce its own what we like to call flow, and it connects everything, whether it's a physical connection or just a visual connection, an aesthetic connection. And usually value is a good way to do that. Whether or not, if it's a background, maybe you have to actually put in some line and form to create that connection. But value is usually a really good way of creating that direction. So we have 3 pieces here that all different kind of takes that you could apply this to. So I think my face is over the first, so I think that's May Stern. So on my screen, I can't see the name. But here we have her piece from the Negative Painting Workshop, and you can see there's a distinct flow between that petal or the blossom on the bottom is clearly in front, and then using some shadow underneath it to dictate that that is on top. Yes, yes, it is May's. To then move down, and then you have other petals, and then you can see about 2/3 up, the entire blossom is a little bit darker in value, which notes it's further back. And then it pops back up for some highlights on the top ones, meaning that they're overhanging. And then you can also see there's a flow between that lower left corner, which is about almost as dark as it gets in the painting. There's a few areas next to the points of interest which draw you in, but that lower left is dark, and the upper right is kind of dark, and it creates this diagonal which moves through the center of the piece. And you can see that all of the interest, it's going light, dark, that change up that kind of excites your eye, and that brings you through the piece. And then one thing I would leave off with this piece to kind of move into the other 2 pieces is, once again, talking about white objects. It can be really, really hard to drop a dark shadow on a white object. I know from experience, I still work with sometimes working too light and then having to darken later, but using shadows to connect. So it might feel weird to paint those petals a dingy, like not dingy, Cascade green is hardly dingy, but a darker hue, even though you know in your brain that it's white. But using that and understanding that's the shadow, it's not a dark petal, it's the shadow on the petal. Once you step back later on, you will see how much that helps create the direction in your piece. So moving on to the 2 other pieces here, they are also white flowers. And you could see where, like, some of them, we have, like on the tulip there, the purple brings you down in that volume. And then there's a little bit in the greenery below it. But if there was maybe a little bit more shadow underneath it to kind of dictate how the flower is interacting with the greenery, whether, you know, you're picking out one of those to be the stem and just kind of like, I think the right word, painted in the shadow around that to kind of highlight that is the connecting piece. That's how it's rooted in the scene. And sometimes you can exaggerate your reference photo if it's not indicative enough. There's never as such thing as a perfect reference photo, so always feel free to exaggerate and or change things. And then here was Sandra's piece here, talking about that gradient going into the petal from the other piece before. So the flower itself stands out really nicely against that background. There's a high contrast, and there's also that vibration between that rosy pink and that green, because they're complements. So there's a nice vibration there too. But then maybe using a bit more shadow next to where those petals are overlapping, it will create that rhythm that tells you that each of these pieces are going, there's a shadow, there is a change in depth going on there as you move into the flower center. But yeah, so creating that flow, using that value to move in a direction. So whether it's through the piece or into the object, or just creating how is the object rooted in the scene. That can be really, really helpful in working to improve that. You want to hit next? Okay, so this is the other personal example I kind of included, talking about adding shadow to white objects. So this was actually a plein air piece. So there is shadow and light on the first one. I can't get rid of, but this is water. So I know in my head that that foam is all white, but it wasn't until I added kind of a dingy Payne's grayish color shadow, or like rhythm of shadows underneath the trees over the water, that you can kind of see that it makes way more sense. So in the first piece here, I had put in, looking specifically at the bottom underneath that very large tree trunk, some negative painting is there to just show the rocks behind the falling water, but it kind of just looks, you can't really tell what's going on. But then as I was sitting there and I was trying to think, like, why doesn't this look like what I'm looking at? And the reason is because I hadn't put in any of the shadows yet. And that was literally the thing that drew me to paint it at that time of day, is because there was this rhythm of shadows moving over the water. So I wish you could like have like in Photoshop where you see the layer of just the shadow painting. But so I put in some like broad sweeping areas of shadow where I saw it in like real life, or generally where it was in real life, because you have to remember in real life stuff is moving very fast. So as much as it killed me to put down this really dark stroke over like the left foliage bank, over the right foliage bank, where I just spent time putting down these really nice like foliage marks, it actually made it look more cohesive as a full piece. And that's kind of one of the things, because sometimes it doesn't work out. I've had plenty of pieces where I make these changes later on in the composition and it doesn't work out. But if you take your time, which is something that I would definitely stress, if I don't think you hear my cats, but if you take your time and kind of think about where your next stroke is going and where it is that you want your painting to move from where it is now, you can definitely add some strokes and make some intelligent decisions about, you know, how to tie it all together. And I definitely think that adding shadows and understanding how to read the light in your scene is one of the biggest things that I know has improved my own work. So I definitely know it will improve yours as well. But definitely getting over that urge to not paint the white subject is one of the biggest ones. Sometimes it's good to just overdo it and then you can reel it back in in your next piece. But it definitely is a process of pushing and then refining and pushing and refining to know the difference between a light touch and then finding that realism in the middle and then too dark. But I think, was that the last slide? I don't remember. I think that might be the last slide.
That is the last slide.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, Jill. It's such an incredible wealth of information in this half hour. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'll just kind of go through some of the comments here, but I think what I'll do is also allow people to take the opportunity to maybe ask a couple more questions, maybe follow-up questions. Yeah, about any of the feedback, even if it's someone else's painting, you know, feel free to ask those questions. We'll get them answered before I do the drawing for the giveaway. You know, we'll end with that. But I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to ask any questions if so. This is the last slide. And some other comments here, Jill, is that they absolutely adore this. There's a lot of love for this feedback session. A lot of thank you, Jill. Thank you so much. Great information. Amazing, very clear examples. I think you putting in your own examples and also talking about your process and kind of your mistakes, but like addressing those mistakes was really helpful for them. You know, feel free to chime in if you agree with that, because that's kind of the sentiment that I was getting there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's hard to comment on how a piece can improve if you don't show, how that advice would improve it. So I actually did go through my own. See, I was trying to find pieces from when I was kind of just beginning, and I could tell you that a lot of them are very, very flat looking because I had yet to learn how to use value to create that form and to create that direction in your piece. And the sense of realism, like there is like a magical light that like happens like when you capture because the light, you could have different colors, and as long as the value reads as realism, like it's very freeing because then you can use whatever color you want. And you don't have to worry about like, what color are you using? Like
All right, I did get a question here. Do you think about warm versus cool colors a lot? Or, oh yeah, actually, let's just do that question first before I do the next one. Warm versus cool colors.
So yeah, so actually this chimes right back in with what I was saying with sometimes there's a lot to process while you're doing the painting. Sometimes I like to simplify things by kind of working through my palette at the beginning and kind of getting a game plan for how I'm going to approach something. So whether I am focusing on one area and making sure that I pit like a warm color against a cool color to make like an edge pop. I do try and come into my paintings with a little bit of pre-thought game plan. It is something that if I think of, I like to play with. But like I said, when I'm in the painting, sometimes I'm trying to focus on value. Like the example I gave you, I was trying to focus on the color so much that I kind of skimped on the paying attention to the value, and I definitely got some areas that are a little too dark. And I might have to go back in and see if I can lift some stuff. We'll see. But be really graceful and gentle with yourself with trying to remember all the things. That's why I said like sometimes it's really helpful to just pay attention to one thing at one time and then cut out the other variables, whether you're using monochromatics to cut out the color or you're playing with color, but the perspective doesn't have to be correct. Allow yourself to work on learning one thing and then practice it a few times and then add in something else. That's why, like, if you've ever played a video game, they don't throw you in with all of the moves all at once. Or, you don't, when you're a child, you don't know about all the things you need to know about when you're an adult. You add those things slowly. So yeah, be really graceful with yourself, learning to process it all.
Yeah. And I think you kind of touched on this other question that just came up. But the question from Bonnie was, when you add deeper depth, any color can be used, is her question.
I wouldn't say like any color, but I would encourage you to play with colors that may not be the most like, that pop right to your head at the beginning. If you're just learning, like I said, like sometimes you can use neutral tint. What neutral tint is just a mix of 3 different colors that produce a neutral. But usually it doesn't give you the most lively like shadows or deeper tones. I would play with whether, like we were talking about, whether a complementary color gets you to that first. Do some sketches, do some studies. I'm a huge proponent of, trying out a couple different little bits of my painting a couple different times in different colors, because sometimes you won't expect a color to work and it will. Like when you use orange and blue, those two complements, those two are like probably my favorite complementary colors together. Although like a gold and like a quinacridone violet's beautiful too. But there are certain vibrations that almost do a better job than what you see realistically. But it's down to your artistic preference. Like you could show it to another artist and you'd be like, eh.
All right, awesome. Sorry, I was just answering a couple things in the chat here. Yes, we will have more free sessions. If you're talking about the live feedback session that we just did today with Jill, I think we do have more coming down the pipeline. We definitely want to do more of this. If you really liked what Jill did today, let us know and we can have Jill come back for another round. I'm sure she really enjoyed doing this. I mean, I enjoy listening to Jill and going through all this feedback, and I'm sure it was very helpful for everybody. And a couple of other things, since we also brought up your live demos, Jill, let's talk about your upcoming ones, because you have one coming up on the 14th, I believe, which is the pet sketches. Yeah.
Yes, that's this Friday.
Yeah.
So actually, I have an example one right here. So if you haven't
Oh,
seen
awesome.
the thing, so remember the live demo, it's going to be like a tiny little portion of like what we're going to cover in the mini. But we're going to do like the sketches that I kind of do with like with my cats. So you can do this with any animal. It might kind of be mostly appropriate to those with fur, but those feathers could probably work really similarly. But we're using waterproof ink with some watercolor wash over it. And we're going to be doing a little sketch. So in the live demo, we're going to be doing the inking and then the initial watercolor wash and kind of getting a sense for actually talking about warm and cool colors. So talking about shadows and light and kind of reserving all of that. But yeah, just kind of covering, this is something fun I did last year for my sketchbook project for the Brooklyn Art Library. I did one of those sketchbooks and submitted. And I know at least one of you had suggested that I should teach it for Etchers. So I did write that down. I did remember. and we're going to be covering that in my next series. And then there's another one down the line, which actually ties into one of the questions we had gotten from one of the pieces today with working with negative painting and color. There will be one with florals that will be coming up later in the spring too. So
right. Yeah,
stick
so
around.
stay tuned for that. Yes. So definitely put it in your schedule to do the pet sketches with Jill later this week on Friday. And then stay tuned for her next round in March for more negative painting techniques. So, all right, I think those are all the questions I am seeing. So why don't we go ahead and choose our winner, Jill? What do you think?
I think that sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you everybody for sticking around to watch with us. We had like 45, 50-ish people at one point. So this is amazing. Thank you so much for all of this. As you can see, we put in the names of all the artists who've submitted their beautiful, beautiful work for Jill to critique today. And you are in the draw to win. So I'm going to go ahead and click the thing so that it'll spin and we'll get our winner for today. So drum roll. And let's see who our winner is. Oh my gosh. And we have our winner. Yay! I love the little effects that this this website have. It's super cute. Sandra, yes, I've been seeing you in the chat. Thank you so much, Sandra, for your work. Congratulations on your win. Just confirm what your Facebook name is in the chat, and our marketing slash community manager team will get in touch with you to work that out with you. And I think that's really it. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you around for the next demos, the next mini workshops, the next session, the next anything Etchr. Jill, thank you so much for your time today. It was a lot of fun to host you, and I think you did an amazing job giving such good feedback to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Make sure everyone keeps painting, because if we have another one, I'm gonna need like more stuff to pull up.
Absolutely, yeah. Paint more stuff. If you'd like to have Jill give more feedback, particularly, she if you could do paintings that are her classes, it's a little bit easier for her to kind of give critique based off of the classes that she's already done. So that's just the other thing. We'll see you guys around the Facebook group. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and yeah, stay safe out there, everybody. All right, call ahead. Bye bye now.
Bye, everyone.